All right, good morning. All right, so let's see. Today we're going to have a quiz, which will be available for 24 hours. I set it up to start at 12:30. With some time points I need to add to. Okay? And remember, the quiz usually covers everything we talked about from now to the beginning of the semester. Of course, by the way, when we start our second part after exam 1, then the quizzes will be in part 2 only. I'm not going to go all the way back. All right, now, there are some people that send me an email about their figure point or their attendance point. We talked about the disaccharides, and we mentioned those disaccharides we need to memorize. Maltose, sucrose, and lactose. We mentioned, of course, or we wanted to pay a specific, special attention to the kind of bond between the two monosaccharides that make those disaccharides the way they are. We also talked about polysaccharides, and we talked about cellulose and starch and glycogen. Cellulose has the beta linkage, they all are glucose-based, but the glucose in cellulose is beta alpha 1,4, no branches, in other words, no 1,6 bond, just alpha 1,4 all the way, and that gives it this straight, undigestible for us, at least. Now, of course, other chemicals can easily dissolve it, and so there are enzymes for this. Bacteria actually have no problem doing anything with that. We just lack the enzyme that breaks the beta bond. Now, on the other hand, starch and glycogen is an animal cell, or we find it in animals, as in the store. Starch is usually in plants, and starch, we have two flavors of starch, amylose and amylopectin. Remember, amylopectin is the one that has branches. Glycogen is always branched, but it has more frequent branches. And the branching, again, is what one? 1,6. That makes a branch. And that branch, of course, can extend as 1,4. So we see that. And of course, the nature of the bond, the alpha one, the one that we can digest, will give the glycogen its globular form. It's like globular configuration. So it's like a sphere of energy, if you will. And we will see that when we talk about metabolism, how to do it. All right. Now, we mentioned a very important modification, O and N. All right. Those are either oxygen or nitrogen on the sugar. And we mentioned those particular kind of sugars that are O or N modified, that those are usually associated with proteins that are modified, glycoproteins. The molecules that have mostly protein and little modifications, okay? And so we mentioned, of course, those particular proteins have asparagine and threonine as part of the amino acids that we modify. Now, of course, we talked plenty about how important this is in life in general and how modification is absolutely important. So glycoproteins, they have glycosaminoglycans. That's the carbohydrates we talked about yesterday. And basically, they are mostly protein. We've seen erythropoietin as one of those proteins that are modified in order to be functional, hormone erythropoietin. Proteoglycans also have glycosaminoglycans, but they are mostly carbohydrates and little proteins. Of course, that ratio is even much bigger in the mucoproteins. Mucins are also mucoproteins. And they also must be carbohydrates. And in mucoproteins, threonine and serine are the two amino acids where the attachment happens. But in both of those cases, we have this humongous carbohydrate molecule, very, very big. You can see it almost with the naked eye. And then we have these proteins that are to it. All right, these are the proteoglycans that are part of the glycoproteins and all the glycoproteins and the mucoproteins, etc. And we've talked about those in sort of semi-detailed. I mentioned, of course, no structures need to be memorized here. I just want you to be aware of those names, okay? Because actually those are relevant in everyday life, especially in the medical, well, pharmaceutical and medical applications. All right. We mentioned also that one of them is here with the sialic acid, that influenza takes advantage of the sialic acid. So I mentioned that pathogens, bacteria and viruses that cause diseases, those usually, some of them can have this coat of complex carbohydrate in order to evade the immune system. Okay, influenza is no difference to that as well. However, actually, influenza, in addition to that, it finds the sialic acid that we use. Okay, and I mentioned yesterday that it uses it as a disguise, but it rather uses it as an adhesion. In other words, it finds it on the cell, and because there is sialic acid, it has these special receptors called heme that will make it clump to it and attach to it, and hence it can then get inside the cell, replicate, and then it bugs out of the cell after, of course, it frozen and loses the resources. All right, modifications. We talk about modification where it happens. It happens in the two compartments, in the plasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus. Right? And then, of course, those particular proteins, any protein to be modified usually ends up in the plasmic reticulum. Now, whether afterwards it ends up going outside the cell or inside the cell, that's another signaling system, but it also depends on the kind of modification. All right? So, the proteins that are modified eventually end up either in a secretory granule that kicks it out, or it ends up inside either in the lysosome or in the cytoplasm, etc., whatever it has, whatever is destined to do. And so the end glycosylation, the modification of the proteins with end sugars, happen in the endoplasmic reticulum, while the O happens in the Golgi apparatus. Now the N starts at the endoplasmic reticulum. If there's any N left, if further it happens in Golgi apparatus. However, the O glycosylation happens only in the Golgi apparatus. Okay. Anyway, let's see. Of course, this was our carrier of those modified or modification sugars, and it's usually carried here. And again, we do not need to memorize the structure. We just need to know that there is a vertical phosphate that usually is in the membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum and goes to the apparatus. All right. So that's what I wanted to talk about as far as carbohydrates. This is just in a nutshell what we discussed. Any questions about carbohydrates? Okay. We of course also mentioned the blood type and how that is affected by mutations of different enzymes. All right. Now, for some reason, I thought there was some clicker questions here, and that's very odd. But hopefully they're covered. Supposed to have been questions about this before the end. Anyway, we'll see. All right, so let's go to fatty acids. Fatty acids, of course, we started talking about them yesterday, and we mentioned that one of the main things about fatty acids, of course, are the membranes. So they definitely are extremely, extremely important. Now, we have seen how the membranes are, in the past, we've seen how they look like, and now we're going to elaborate a little bit on this. As a matter of fact, we're going to watch a movie today to show how fatty acids, how membranes behave. Okay, so we have a bilayer, and I'll talk about this, and there are proteins attached to it in different ways. And the fatty acid membrane is really not this rigid thing. It's not a bag that's rigid. It's actually very fluid, almost like you're on a beach and you're seeing these ripples with the fatty acid. That's how dynamic they are. Now, they can be solid and they can be fluid, but either way, they're almost like wax, so they can melt as well. All right. Now they come. Okay, so those clicker questions are actually about carbohydrates. So let's start with our first one. Where does the glycosylation happen?
How about what type of enzymes synthesize oligosaccharides? What class of enzymes? All right. Sugars are commonly linked to which amino acid residues in glycoproteins? In our first kind of proteins. Which ones? I mentioned those lipids to be aware of, and really the important thing, and people ask me whether we need to memorize the systemic name, and that's fine. Just keep the common name in your mind. And most importantly, or equally importantly, also make sure you know where the unsaturations are, where the double bonds are. So make sure you know what delta means and the atoms that this delta, this double bond happens to be. And this is, again, just kind of an idea of how fatty acids work. Because when we talk about fatty acid metabolism, when we talk about degradation of fatty acids, actually those spaces, those deltas are extremely important. And actually the entire metabolic process of fatty acids relies on shifting and isomerizing those double bonds around in order to do this function. All right. Let's see here. So we start here. We have three types of fatty acids involved in membranes. Phospholipids, glycolipids, and cholesterol. Cholesterol, of course, it's usually the first molecule that gives all the steroids and hormones and stuff like that. So it's very, very simple. All right, so phospholipids, go through this really quick. There are aspects of phospholipids that we absolutely have to know. Okay? We can have two platforms for phospholipids. Basically, platform, I mean, it's a molecule in which fatty acids are those very long chains of carboxylic acid, those are fatty acids, all need some sort of platform that you carry stuff on. One of them is glycerol. Glycerol is, by the way, a molecule that you need to know very well, and I'm sure you know it before. It's the simplest, one of the simplest molecules. It's a 3-carbon. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. It's an alcohol. H2OH, H2OH, OH, and H. Then that's it. Right? Now those 3 OHs, those 3 hydroxyl groups, is where we add fatty acids. Okay? Now, in phospholipids, 2 of them are the ones we use to add fatty acids. In phospholipids. Okay? Usually 1 and 2. And the kind of bond is, as you can see here, is, what kind of bond is this? That's ester, right? Okay, so that's the kind of bond. So the fatty acid is esterified to glycerol. And that happens on carbon number 1 and 2. That leaves carbon 3 extremely charged, and it always has a phosphate. Okay? Now, to complete the fatty acid, so this, by the way, this here, where you have 2 fatty acids, and notice we have R1 and R2. R1 can equal to R2, and that means how long is that chain of carbons. 12, 13, 9, 10, 16, 20, whatever. And also it can be unsaturated. Okay? So that's the definition of R in those two. This is called phosphatidate. Phosphatidate. Once we add an alcohol to here, and I'm going to talk about alcohol in a little bit. Once we add an alcohol, then it becomes phosphatidic acid and it becomes phospholipid. That is one of the many kinds of fatty acid molecules that are part of the membrane, or the cell membrane. Okay? So we have 2 fatty acids, see this cartoon, glycerol, 2 fatty acids, phosphate, and alcohol. What can that alcohol be? Well, it can be glycerol itself. Okay? Then it would be phosphatidate glycerol. Okay, let's see what other. These are the types of alcohol that are attached to it. 5 types. How many of those we know already? We know serine. Do you know glycerol? We just went over them. They have ethylamine, choline, and inosine. You know what? We don't have to memorize this structure. Okay? By any means. Okay? So you know this. So you know at least how to draw 2 phosphatidic acids. Excuse me. Now those are the types that actually are fully phospholipids. We have phosphatidylcholine, that means choline alcohol is attached to the phosphate. We have phosphatidylserine. I'm sorry, this is choline, this is serine. Phosphatidylphenylamine, phosphatidylacetone. Okay? Those are the kind of phosphatic acids. Now notice here, this is actually two phosphatidic acids coming together with an alcohol in between. And that's glycerol. This is called cardiolipin. Alright? I also don't want to memorize the structure. I just want to give you aware of cardiolipin. Cardiolipin, by the way, is called cardiolipin because it was first discovered and isolated from the heart muscle of beef. But then we found out that actually it's mostly in the mitochondrial inner membrane. And some bacteria also have it. The mitochondrial inner membrane. And as a matter of fact, since it's part of that membrane, this is very important because it optimizes the function of many enzymes we will talk about when we talk about energetics in the mitochondria. Okay? Cardiolipin. Now, the other platform, so the first platform of phospholipids is glycerol. The other one is this molecule, sphingosine. You do not need to memorize the structure of sphingosine. You need to know sphingosine. Okay? No structure. Cool? Now, where do fatty acids go on sphingosine? They go right here, on that nitrogen. And hence we have an amide bond, rather than a bond. That's the difference between sphingolipids and phospholipids, phosphatidic acid, is the amide bond. And one fatty acid is. Actually, sphingosine itself is pretty long. It's not too heavy. It has a lot of carbon. And so that's where the fatty acid is. And then, right here, you would have something like choline, phosphate. Of course, you can have phosphate, but you can have different alcohols. This is one of the flavors right here. This is called sphingomyelin. Sphingomyelin, because it's part of the myelin sheath in the nervous neurons in the brain. Okay? It's actually a very good insulating for the axons, because you don't want the message to be crossed between different cells. So you won't have. Actually, many diseases, neurological disorders happen because we don't synthesize enough of that can code our neuron axons. Okay? So they start inspiring between different neurons. All right. Now, the second part is glycolipids, and that's obviously lipids and carbohydrates, glycolipids. All right, it's also sphingosine. You can see here the fatty acid, but the only difference between that and sphingolipids is that with alcohol we have a sugar, hence glycol. And that sugar is glucose or galactose. Here, I'm telling you, and I didn't put that in the one that I uploaded, but this will be uploaded anyway. Galactose cerebroside, so this is called cerebroside before you add the sugar to it. So the galactose version of this you also find in the neurons. And the glucose you find in the muscles and other tissues in general. Okay, but somehow galactose is good to use today. Okay? So that's glycose. That's our second part of the membrane. That also exists in the membrane, of the membrane. Okay, by the way, each one gives membranes different characteristics. The last one is cholesterol. Cholesterol is part of the membrane. Cholesterol, by the way, is one of the most recognized molecules. Look at it from afar, you immediately recognize it. It's sort of like Coca-Cola of the biological system. It's extremely easy to recognize. And by the way, it's the molecules, most of the Nobel Prizes actually were awarded for research related to cholesterol, if you count, percentage-wise. So it's a very generous molecule as far as research. Okay, of course it's very stigmatized because of heart disease and stuff. But the fact is, without cholesterol, there is pretty much for us no life. Okay, we need cholesterol. We need it within reason, of course, because it's part of our membrane, it's part of our hormonal systems, and really, you cannot imagine functioning or having viable multicellular organisms like ourselves without cholesterol, or without all the modification of cholesterol. Okay, so that actually can also be inserted in the membrane and be part of that membrane. Okay? We will see, actually, if you put cholesterol, if you stick it in that membrane by there, you make it more solid, more waxy. It needs more temperature to melt it. Okay? And the other thing is, bacteria don't have it. Archaea don't have it. Only eukaryote fatty acids. So they use it. Bacteria cannot use it because they cannot control the fluidity of the membrane. And we will see that we have, not consciously, but we do control the fluidity of all membranes. Sometimes we want it to be very fluid, sometimes we want it to be very soft. And we use cholesterol bacteria to use different things, and we'll discuss that. Okay, so those are the three kinds. What membrane component contains carbohydrates? What membrane components contain carbohydrates? Now, let's start talking about membrane. We already are familiar with bacteria that live near volcanic beds. Yeah, those are very, very resilient bacteria. You can see this is very hot, and you can imagine with that heat, you can melt pretty much anything, right? Because it's very hot. However, the membranes, which again I want you to think of the membranes as a waxy, semi-liquid kind of thing, until that movie. Their membranes are very resistant to this, and hence, of course, the internal of the cell is also stays cool at a certain temperature. So this is one of the bacteria we have in Coccus janishi, which live there. So in close examination to the membranes, now if you remember, we talked about the hydrophobic effect, how fatty acid molecules come together to make the membrane, right? And because they all try to stay away from water. And we mentioned that this hydrophobic effect is part of what holds the membrane together. Of course, we have weaker bonds like van der Waals interaction and stuff like that, but it's mostly hydrophobic effect. Now here, if you look at one of the phospholipids in Thanatophorus, you will see that actually it's not exactly as we have seen in a couple of slides ago. Okay, what do you see? What's the difference? Let's look at the chain, the green chain here, this fatty acid. Do you see that there is a methyl group? Almost every other carbon, rather than just two hydrogens. Yeah? So those methyl groups, if you have them along a length of 20 amino acids, along millions of those compounds together, they will actually add more hydrophobic effect and more van der Waals interaction. So you have actually more than just hydrophobic effect. Now you have van der Waals interaction. So you have more weak bonds, of course, over that entire membrane. You have pretty good thing. The other thing that we can see here is the type of bond between the fatty acid, the carboxylic acid fatty acid, and the glycerol. You see the difference? That was the one that we talked about, ester. But here it's not ester, is it? What do you call this kind of bond? Ether bond, right? It's an O with two R's. That's ether. That's stronger than this bond. And so you have more added strength because of the type of the attachment of the fatty acid to the glycerol. Okay? So that makes it more resistant. Okay. All right. Yeah, that animation comes in. So let's look at it now in a zoom out kind of format. This is a space from the model, and this is of course how we draw it. The two fatty acids and the phosphate group. So the phosphate group is charged, right? Where the alcohol is, that's charged. So that can interact with water or with the aqueous environment. While this, of course, really hates water and will stay in. So now let's look at here. These are different phospholipids, and you can see those tails can actually form a membrane. So they come together like this, where the phosphate with the alcohol, okay, the charged groups are either on the inside of the cell or the outside of the cell, and that will allow the cell to interact with the environment. While this, of course, is the barrier, the self from everybody else. Okay? This is, of course, micelles, and then we have liposome, and we talked about that very briefly when we talked about at the beginning of the semester. What's the difference, and basically the concentration thing. Now look at this membrane here. Those fatty acids are lining up along the entire length of the fatty acid. The entire length, you have these hydrophobic effects and van der Waals interaction. Almost the entire length. Okay? So that makes this very solid. Now look at here. Those, while they look very weird, twisted, and that's because they have unsaturations. The double bond actually causes a kink. The more double bonds we have, the more kinks we have in that tail, and you end up having like a structure like this. That is also part of the membrane. Now, you notice here, you don't have this entire length of bonding between two molecules. You have less bonding here, right? Because of the kinks. You have actually local binding. What does that tell you? Would you think that this is more fluid or this is more fluid? The bottom one is more fluid because we have less bonds, so it's much more, so it's easier to melt. It really needs a very low temperature to melt as opposed to this. Cells can control this. Cells can control the fluidity. They will simply add double bonds or less. If it's obviously shorter, then also it will be less weak bonds. But basically, that's a very important difference between more fluid and less fluid membranes. Okay? So, hydrophobic interaction is the main thing that assemble fatty acids together. And then, of course, we have van der Waals and some hydrogen bonds that can exist there. And we'll talk about that in the context of proteins associated with those. All right. The one thing another thing about membranes, they tend to self-heal. You know, if you puncture a hole, and then they immediately try to heal because they really, naturally, they don't want to be associated with water or with the environment. This is a liposome. A liposome is basically a bilayer. It has one layer here and one layer here. Okay? So two bilayers here. One bilayer basically is two fatty acids coming together this way. So we have two of them. And this, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the semester, is used in order to deliver medicine. It's part of the going on. And the way they do it, let's say they want to deliver or they want to package something in it. So you have your phospholipids here, whatever that phospholipid has here, and the drug is here. For example, this is glycine. All right, and then you sonicate it, and basically you're disturbing those phospholipids. And so once they disturb, they don't want to be associated with water, so immediately they form those liposomes engulfing whatever that drug is. And then you can filter that out. You can filter it properly by two things that we already know. Dialysis or gel filtration to get rid of the excess thing, and then you have those little packages. Okay? So some medications are delivered this way. Also, part of the techniques we use in studying lipids or studying proteins associated with lipids is this double compartment gadget here, where we have the buffer or the different solutions, aqueous solution, and with a paintbrush, we usually go to this little well here and we paint it with our oil, our fatty acid that we're trying to study, and then we fill it up with a buffer, and that remains isolated. Then we have this electrical gadget so we can measure the resistance across the membrane. And then sometimes if they're studying proteins that make pores in the membrane, they will insert themselves automatically and study what's the average molecules, speed of molecules going through that. So there's many actually very sophisticated ways of studying biological membranes. Okay? Now because of that polar head of the phospholipids and sphingolipids, the outside part and the inside part, there's a permeability factor. Permeability means things that will be allowed to cross with that membrane without any help. All right? Now, water is pretty much the only polar molecule that can pass without any problem. Okay? Water is they indulge, they become mixed, but then everything else really would not. Of course, ions, hell no. There's no way they can pass anyway. Right? Those are absolutely forbidden to pass. They need help. They need a gate or a passport and a protein that recognizes those ions specifically to allow them to go in and out. Otherwise, we will be really, trembling because the electric current in our body will be really out of whack. So those are extremely forbidden to pass without proteins. And those also, maybe you leave them long enough, they might diffuse, over 100 years or something, but they also have their own protein that recognize it and let it go in and out. All right, now, we mentioned membranes. Those membranes on themselves, they're very good compartmentalizing agents. They will allow us to distinguish self from non-self, that's fine. But they are useless as far as interacting with outside environment. What's going to make them interact is what kind of proteins they have. The proteins, again, are the workhorse of the cell, and we've seen that they can be anything from enzymes to structural proteins to receptors, etc. Right? So each membrane will have its own battery, an army of proteins that are somehow associated with those membranes. And so that's very important. And talking about us, and talking about, of course, other eukaryotes, animals, fungi, etc., we are multi-tissue. It's not only multicellular organisms. We have different tissues. We have liver that looks different from the heart, that's different from the kidney, etc. So there are different tissues. And although we have the same, all the cells have the same genetic content, they eventually distinguish themselves by forming these tissues. And those tissues, because they have specific function, hence you would expect their cells to have different kinds of protein profiles depending on their function, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be different tissues. And so we can actually see that, and I'm now relying on what we talked about in previous techniques, we can actually take those fatty acids, those specific tissues, and break the membranes and just run a regular SDS page. Okay? SDS page. And SDS page, of course, will detect the proteins that we've seen before, once we stage it. And so you can see here those different membrane profiles from the same human being, or from the same animal, with different tissues. Red blood cells, that's A. Photoreceptors, that's the I. And then we have muscles, C. You can see they totally have different protein contents. There might be some overlap in some proteins here and there, but they have different protein profiles. And that, of course, is a testament of their different jobs in our bodies. That's why they have these different protein profiles. All right? So you can see that red blood cells have a lot of proteins in their cells. Of course, those are not hemoglobins, right? Hemoglobins are inside the cytoplasm of the red blood cells, but other proteins that interact with the plasma. Then the photoreceptors probably have one very important protein that's responsible for converting light signals. That's one that we care about. And of course, muscles have their own kind of proteins. So you can have, from very low protein content, 18%, to all the way to 75%. I would imagine that the brain, the neurons, have less protein content. Mitochondria is extremely rich with protein because there's a lot of stuff happening, producing energy. Chloroplast, same thing. Okay, so even within the cell itself, the endoplasmic reticulum, the mitochondria, they all have also their own protein profile. So this is integrated. Those are called peripheral proteins. Now those proteins usually, or some of them, don't even have a membrane domain. They're simply associated through ionic interaction with those polar head groups to the phospholipids. And they can attach based on that. Or they can attach with integral membrane proteins. Basically, they have bonds with integral membrane proteins. They can be alone, they can be without. Prostaglandin, that's another protein, that's right. Another protein that actually is a cytoplasmic protein, but its substrate happens to be arachidonic acid. Right? Arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is actually part of the membrane components, one of the fatty acids, 20 carbon long. And this is associated with headache, by the way, if it's lower functions. So what it means to get the arachidonic acid and interact with it. But the protein itself is cytoplasmic protein. It's a globular protein with cytoplasmic. So what is the solution? How can this protein get the substrate from 2 different environments? Okay? So the answer is those anchors. Okay? Those anchors are usually hydrophobic, like a hook. Like you hook things on it. So it's basically hanging through this hydrophobic anchor. In this case, it's called alpha helix, that allow it to stay with the membrane, and hence you create a channel, hydrophobic channel. Sort of like when you board the airplane and you have this thing between the terminal and the airplane, that's a channel you walk in, so you don't go down. The same thing here. The arachidonic acid then will go all the way to the middle of the protein in a very hydrophobic environment. That's the active side of the protein, right? Because of the folding of the weak bonds. And then it does what it does to the modifications, and then it returns back. Okay? As a matter of fact, salicylic acid, part of the aspirin, is used to inhibit the function of this protein in order to reduce headache when it's over, or prostaglandin exclusively. These are some other anchors. You don't need to memorize any of those factors, by the way. Just need to know that there are anchors that are usually hydrophobic, that are hydrophobic, not usually, they happen. Okay? So they attach to the protein, and this long fatty acid chain allows it to go and hook up to the membrane from the inside of that. Are we cool so far? Any questions? No? Cool. All right, now, we talked about sequence before and prediction of function. Can we predict hydrophobic loops and stuff like that? Can we predict membrane proteins? I think we're getting better at this. We can predict it from the sequence. And it's again, what are the percentages or what is the energy that will allow it to be more hydrophobic, hydrophilic? And we can, this is the website, if you want to visit, it's called TMHMM, or Transmembrane Hidden Markov Model Prediction kind of protein. Give it a sequence here, the one letter code, and it will then tell you if it has these kind of structures that goes in and out, transmembrane helices. This is one of the many domains. All right, now those fatty acids are the fluidity of the membrane. They're moving around, okay? So you can see one phospholipid actually can move around laterally, and that's very rapid. That's called lateral diffusion. That happens all the time. This here, the flip-flop, which is going from the hourly flip to the annually flip, or opposite to the opposite direction, that doesn't happen very rapidly. Okay, that's very slow. Okay, and usually there's an enzyme called lipids that flip those stuff sometimes if needed. All right, this again, sigmoidal thing. That's actually associated, just like when you see it in melting the DNA. Same thing here. Melting the membrane is exactly the same. The melting temperature is the temperature that needs to melt half of the membrane, separating the bilayer from each other. That's melting, right? All right, and since it's association between those molecules, that needs. All right, remember, cholesterol is part of the thing that makes membranes so solid or more solid, and hence the melting temperature will shift to higher. Bacteria don't have it. When we want to control our fluidity, our membrane fluidity, we usually stick more cholesterol or use more lipids. Okay? Bacteria cannot do that. Bacteria instead will vary the length of those fatty acids, allowing for more hydrophobic interaction, more valuable interaction, or less. That makes it more fluid or less fluid. Okay, so here you can see this again. Because of that kink, you have only this local place where you have hydrogen bonding, van der Waals interaction, hydrophobic interaction, as opposed to this. This is why we have more and less fluids. And you can see here, this is very, you're going to see it right now, actually. This is rafts. These rafts are more solid portion or local zones in the membrane that are more solid than the rest of it. That's because it has extra cholesterol and extra stuff. So let's go see a movie. All right. Well, before we see a movie, okay? Let me see. Now, membrane in the bacteria actually have, just like us, lipid bilayers, except they're a little bit more elaborate than us because we all have more tissues and more cellular organisms. We have something they call gram-negative, and I'm sure you know that from the microbiology, if you study microbiology, and gram-positive. The difference between both of them, gram-negative bacteria have two lipid bilayers. Okay, inner membrane and outer membrane. In between them, there is a lot of carbohydrates, called peptidoglycan. That's the third fatty space. Gram-positive bacteria have only one membrane, and then they have a very thick layer of peptidoglycan, making very resistant to lysis, breaking the cell. You can see here how the proteins are actually in and out. It so happens that the outer membrane of the bacteria is more permeable, has more holes in it for the proteins than the inner membrane right before the cytoplasm. Okay, that's something that I just want you to know. I put it on Facebook and I put it here also, the lengthy part of this movie, about 8 minutes, that actually is narrated and talks about stuff and explains certain things. What I want you to not worry about, so let me